Your name for the record?
Emmer Shields III, Emmer, last is Shields.
What is your occupation?
Patrol deputy with the Dunn County Sheriff's Office.
And how long have you been employed in law enforcement?
Just shy of 12 years.
Has all of that time been with Dunn County?
No, I worked part-time at several other agencies. I'm going on my 7-year anniversary with the county.
And what are your primary duties as a patrol officer?
Just patrol, responding to complaints, initiating traffic stops, conducting investigations, dealing with public issues, complaints.
On March 22nd of 2018, were you dispatched to a residence on 430th Avenue?
Yes.
Is that residence located in the Springbrook Township
I believe it is, yes.
in Dunn County, Wisconsin?
Yes, ma'am.
What, if any, information did you receive while you were en route?
I was advised by our dispatch that the gentleman that owned the residence had a young female that had shown up at his residence and was in some form of distress, was covered in mud, and I believe also blood was what came out to our dispatch. Our dispatch advised that she had mud and had blood on her person.
And do you recall what time you arrived at the residence?
Approximately maybe 5 to 7 minutes after the initial call.
Are you familiar with a CAD report?
Yes.
What is that?
The CAD report is our electronic system that is generated by dispatch. It contains information, the complainant's information, a log of when units would have been dispatched or when they would have arrived, and so on and so forth.
And if you reviewed the CAD report, would you be able to tell me what time you arrived at that residence?
I believe so, yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 165. Is that an accurate copy of the CAD report for this case?
It appears to be, yes. Appears to be 1625 hours. 1625, which is approximately 10 minutes after the initial call.
Okay, so 4:25 you arrived,
It appears so, yes.
and the call was at 4:15?
Yes.
Move Exhibit 165 into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, can we take it up later?
All right, we'll just hold off on that.
And what's your badge number?
217.
So what, if anything, did you do when you arrived at the residence?
Parked my squad in the driveway. I exited my squad and made contact with, I believe is the rear of the residence, and made contact with Trooper Knutson, who was already on scene.
And did you enter the residence?
Yes.
What did you observe when you entered the residence?
When I entered the residence, we were in kind of a small, confined area, maybe like a mudroom, I guess somebody would describe it as, perhaps. And there was a female sitting on a chair in a distress, and Trooper Knutson was standing on her left side, and the complainant, Mr. Sipple, I believe, was standing to the rear of them.
And is that same female present in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Could you describe what she's wearing and where she's seated?
She's wearing glasses, a pink coat, and seated next to her counsel, Mr. Nelson.
The record will reflect that the witness has identified Ms. McCandless.
And did you ask anything to the defendant when you arrived?
I asked her numerous things, yes.
What did you ask?
I asked how she had gotten there, what had happened.
Do you
what her
remember?
name was.
Oh, sorry, excuse me. Do you remember asking if she had a phone?
Yes.
And what did she do?
She produced a gold-cased iPod.
Ms. Notoff, is your microphone on?
Yes.
Okay, good.
May I approach, Your Honor? I'm showing you an envelope. It's got officer number 217 on it. Do you recall packaging that item? Or do you recall that item, I guess?
I recall the item. It looks like it was packaged most likely by Sergeant Day.
And if you could put some gloves on and open that. I'm sorry, 243, Your Honor. Sorry, it's been marked. I think it needs to get marked as 243.
Exhibit 243.
Is that the same iPod that you took from the defendant?
It appears to be. It appears to be have a broken face, consistent with the one that I recovered.
Then move exhibit 243 in evidence.
Any objection?
Maybe, but it's super technical, we can take it up later.
All right, we'll withhold ruling at this time.
Did the defendant provide you anything else?
She had given several items to Deputy Knudsen, which was a pair of glasses and then I believe a thing of chapstick as well.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm showing you what's now been marked as exhibit number 244, and I'm putting exhibit sticker 243 on the back of this. Can you open up that package? And do you recognize those?
They appear to be the glasses that was recovered from Ms. McCandless.
And are those in the condition you recall them being in?
It appears to be. I couldn't say for sure, but it appears to be, yes.
Okay. Move exhibit 244 into evidence.
No objection.
244. Exhibit 244 will be received.
Deputy, when you look at those glasses, do you observe any materials on the front of the glasses?
It appears to be some dried blood or biological fluids, yes.
And if you set them on the table, if you could just lay them out, maybe on a flat surface. Do they appear to still be in their same, they're not broken in any way?
No.
The lens is broken?
No.
And then can you describe the defendant's appearance that day?
Generally, I would use the word disheveled. Her legs were very dirty. Her hair was a mess. She had mud on her person and blood over certain portions of her body.
Was the mud that was on her clothes, was it wet or dry?
Depending on the thickness of it, some appeared to be a little bit more dry than others, which would be consistent with somebody walking through a barnyard or something where the thicker mud would be a little bit more wet, would not be completely dry, whereas like a smudge or something like that appeared to be slightly dry.
Where did you observe the mud?
Mostly on her legs, and it appeared to be that there was some on her hands and maybe small spots on her shirt.
Did you notice any injuries?
It appeared that she had some injuries to her left arm, and I also noticed a cut on her upper right thigh that was visible through a tear or a cut in her pants.
Do you recall what kind of pants she was wearing?
No, I want to say jeans, but I don't recall exactly.
Okay. And so when you notice these, I think, cuts on the left arm and upper right thigh, could you determine if the blood was still wet or dry?
Again, it would be depending on where there was a smudge. It appeared to be a little bit more dry, but it did appear, what I saw, that there was portions that appeared to be not dry.
So could you see if they were still bleeding or oozing?
The left side where Trooper Knudsen was not, I didn't see much of that side, but at one portion I kind of kneeled down next to her where her, on her right side where the cut in her leg was. And I just remember seeing several portions of the cut where it was slightly oozing, I guess you could say. Like if you cut yourself and then you squeeze your arm, it would kind of maybe ooze out in several spots, but not over the whole cut.
So let's start from the neck up. Did you observe any injuries from the neck up?
I did not see any.
What about from the neck down to the waist?
Over her torso, I did not see any.
And waist down to the feet?
Would be the cut to her right thigh that I saw.
Did you ask the defendant what the last thing was that she remembered?
Yes, and she made reference to, I believe she made reference to getting them off of me or getting them off of me. I asked her to kind of clarify that statement, and she really couldn't.
So at this point, did you know if there was one person or two, or more than one, I guess?
Because she used the word them, I actually notified the other units that were responding to possibly be on the lookout for more than one individual.
Did you ask her name?
I did.
How did she respond?
Initially, she said I think she made this statement, I'm trying to figure that out, something like that.
And then did she eventually provide a name?
Yes, when she was speaking with Trooper Knudsen and I believe members of fire rescue that had showed up, she said the name Monica. I overheard that and then asked them about that, and they stated that she referred to herself as Monica.
And then did she later state Monica Carlin?
Correct.
And so what did you do, if anything, after you received a name?
I contacted our dispatch and to see if that name was in what we call our in-house records, would be anybody that we've had contact with in our department. And they advised that nobody matching that name had been contacted by our department.
And did fair to say she had a difficult time answering your questions?
Yes.
When asked if there was someone that they could call, was she able to provide a name?
She did provide a name, Jason, what I heard was Engel with an E. That was later changed to, I believe, Mangle with an M.
So, did the ambulance or paramedics arrive at some point?
They did.
Approximately how much time were you with the defendant before the ambulance arrived?
Anything that I say would be a guess. I want to say between 5 and 10 minutes.
Okay. And did you then follow the ambulance to Eau Claire?
I did.
Do you recall, was she still wearing the same clothes that you saw? The ambulance didn't have her change clothes or anything?
No, and when she was brought into the hospital, she was wearing the same clothing that she wore at the residence.
What happened when you went to, was it Mayo Hospital in Eau Claire?
It was, correct.
What happened when you were there?
She actually, when we got there, I think she might have advised the ambulance staff that her name was Miss McCandless, Ezra McCandless. The staff was able to find her in their records, and that's how she was identified.
Did she also provide you with the correct spelling for Jason Mengel?
Yes.
And when the defendant was at Mayo, were you able to observe any injuries more closely?
Yes.
Because when she was at Mr. Sippel's house, was there anything covering her body?
Yes, she had a blanket. She was kind of had a blanket, I would say, draped over her shoulders, and that was provided by Mr. Sippel.
And you were able to observe some injuries closer?
Yes.
What injuries did you observe?
When they began to just examine her and clean her arms, it appeared that there was cuts to her left arm, and it actually appeared that there was a word cut in her skin.
What was that word?
Boy.
B-O-Y?
Correct.
Were you able to observe her pants more clearly at the
Yes.
hospital? And how would you describe any defects in her clothing?
I guess what drew my attention to the pants is it wasn't a tear. It appeared to be a very clean and precise, I don't want to use the word precise, a very clean cut, no jagged edges from what I could see, as if a sharp object had been used to cut it and not being torn on a fence post or something like that.
And how was the defendant's demeanor when you were with her?
She was still appeared to be very distraught, upset.
Did you observe any tears when she was with you?
I did not.
Was she later evaluated by Mayo medical staff?
Yes,
And what did you do during that time?
a lot. I was able to track down Mr. I'm going to mispronounce it. I believe it's Mangle, her stepfather. I spoke to her stepfather and spoke to members of Eau Claire Police Department who had been involved with in an incident with her earlier in the day, and spoke to Officer Reeves about that contact and some other information involving Ms. McCandless.
And when she was at the hospital, did you ask her if she would be willing to have a sexual assault exam done or a SANE exam?
Yes.
And how did she respond?
She responded that she would do that, yes.
So what, if anything, were you in the room, I guess, when she was having this exam?
I was not.
Did you ask the medical staff to do anything with her clothes?
Yes, due to the statements about her being assaulted, I requested the staff separate all of her items of clothing, placing them in separate paper bags for evidentiary purposes, and then to staple those shut. They were placed in a closet that was locked by one of the hospital staff.
And so did you speak with her again before the SANE exam or after?
I spoke to her before. I did not speak to her after. When the SANE nurse arrived, due to the procedures and how long it was, it's a very thorough examination. And she stated that we wouldn't be able to speak with Ms. McCandless for, I want to say at least an hour. I want to say maybe approximately 2.
And so I guess going back to the clothes, did you observe the staff collect the clothes?
Yes.
Okay, I think this is a good spot to stop. I'm advised that lunch is here. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to recess for the lunch hour. It might be a little longer than an hour because we do have some other issues to take up. So, okay, I'll rise and drink. Excuse for lunch. Okay, please be seated, and we'll wait till the door closes. And Deputy Shields, you can step down and take a break. I don't know what you want to do with these items of evidence during the noon hour. You want to just leave them right there?
I'm done with them unless Mr. Nelson wants them.
Okay.
I'd like to make just my own visual observations of those things. So at some point over the lunch hour, if I could. So I'd like them out. I don't want them packed up right now.
Sure.
Just before I cross-examine them, I'd like to see them if they want to pack them up over lunch and then unpack them.
Okay.
However they want to do it.
All right. Well, let's try to be efficient here with our time. We have to go back to some issues, some sidebars.
Judge, I believe just after Mr. Davidson's testimony, I approached asking how you wanted me to handle the stickers that I'd placed on Exhibit 282. I suggested that at this next break, I take a photo of Exhibit 282 with the stickers on it, and then either send it to myself and print it out, or send it to the clerk and have it printed out so that we could document that. And I think everybody agreed to that.
Yes, there was no objection to that, and that was at 11:23. 11:05, we had a sidebar, and that was, as Mr. Dufour had Exhibit 533, which apparently was a written statement of Chester Davidson. Mr. Nelson objected, we had a sidebar, and Mr. Dufour indicated that he was using this for prior inconsistent statement, and I think that was the end of that. Anything further that you wish to, any record you'd like to make about that, Mr. Nelson?
No, well, I was objecting because I thought he was using it to refresh his memory. He made it clear that he wasn't doing that. He was using it to impeach his own witness. And Your Honor ruled that he could do that.
All right, and then at 11:24, there was a sidebar. There's an objection prior to Mr. Sipple taking the stand. Mr. Nelson objected to the transcript, and the court indicated that it would allow the transcript, and that was offered as a separate exhibit, number 164, and the court indicated it would receive 164 and has received 164, but you want to just make a record of your objection to 164?
Yes, I objected. I don't think transcripts are per se admissible. It's hearsay. It's the defense position that the tape gets played and the jury gets to listen to that transcript and make their own determination of what was said. Your Honor overruled that objection.
All right, and frankly, I'm not sure of a specific, I don't know if the state wishes to address that as far as the admissibility of a transcript. But the court has received it, and I can give you my reasons, but if the state would like to make a record as it relates to that.
Yes, Your Honor, I believe the transcript is admitted to aid the jury in understanding what is being said, and there's a specific instruction on that, and I don't recall the number off the top of my head. The court certainly should give that, but it's an instruction about recordings and says, you know, you're provided a transcript, they're provided it by scrolling there, but they're to base their decision on what they hear, and the transcript is provided to aid them if it does aid them. That's not verbatim quote from the instruction, but it's very similar to that. It's to that effect, and so that's the basis for the introduction of it, is to aid the jury in understanding what is being said.
All right, and first of all, the recording is played, the contents of the recording, there was no objection to that. Transcript, and from the court's perspective, as long as it's accurate, I've allowed it to be admitted, and if for no other reason, I certainly believe that 908.03 sub 24, the residual hearsay exception, given that you have the recording, you have circumstantial guarantees of trustworthiness, and frankly, I don't think it does any harm, or there's no prejudice to the defense. And also, you know, jurors are often visual. You're just hearing a recording. As long as they, in this particular case, they saw a transcript while the recording was being played, and they can decide for themselves whether it's an accurate transcript. An issue can be raised about that, but from the court's perspective, it appeared to be an accurate transcript. I don't know what 164 is, but again, its admissibility is, again, court believes, and part of that is that it's an accurate transcript. And so if the defense has any issues about that, we can take that up and address that. But I believe at this point there's sufficient circumstantial guarantees of trustworthiness, and it's not uncommon. Frankly, again, the transcript there was a transcript or while the recording was being played. And I'm assuming, maybe I shouldn't assume that it is the same as 164. If it is not, then I guess that's an issue we're going to have to address later on. But
I understand Your Honor's ruling, but just so it's clear, we were objecting to the showing of the transcript on the screen and I mentioned that at the sidebar, as well as Exhibit 164. So I just wanted to make that clear. I understand Your Honor's ruling. I'm not trying to relitigate it, just we were objecting to the publishing of it as well as to the exhibit itself.
okay, and so noted, and your objection is preserved. Then I believe that we have also I think what's left undone would be objections, at least a request at Exhibit 243 that we not address that until you've had a chance to cross-examine or examine the evidence.
Maybe I'm being overly cautious, but there's obviously data that's on that iPod. And at some point, there's going to be a different separate issue about whether the data that's on the iPod and what portions of that data can be introduced into evidence. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knows, just because the iPod's in, the data within the iPod is not necessarily into evidence. That's a separate matter than the physical piece of evidence. That was all.
So you don't object to the physical piece of evidence as just being an item that was in her possession at that time?
Correct.
Okay. So then the court then will receive Exhibit 243 for that purpose at this point, but not going to the contents or data contained therein at this point.
Then I think the last matter, Judge, was Exhibit 165, which is the CAD report. I had objected. There's inaccurate hearsay that's on that report, and so if they're just using it to establish the time, I understand that, but I don't, the rest of the information entered by dispatch after that is hearsay, and I also just know it's inaccurate.
Okay. Ms. Noto?
I agree. The rest, the state's only using it for the times, not for the hearsay. So I do agree that the other remarks from dispatch would be hearsay and inadmissible.
All right, so as far as the document, if at some point, if the court receives it for the observations made as far as the times of dispatch, arrival, call, so forth, then at some point, if a jury wants to see that, then it would be some redaction of the
Correct. We might
contents,
even,
perhaps.
the defense might even agree to, at that point, stipulation that the call was made at whatever the time is on the call, or whatever the time is on the CAD sheet. So we can solve that problem in that way as well.
All right, so at this point, I'll note that Exhibit 165 is received for the observations related to the time of the call, time of the dispatch, time of the arrival of the officers, but that not for the truth of any of the text comments by dispatchers contained in that document. Fair enough?
Yes?
Okay. Anything else that we need to address from this morning so far? Just so we don't forget.
Sounds like we're moving along quickly, and I don't have a big stack of witnesses that the state's left, so if we could know what's going to go on in the afternoon, at this point, that'd be helpful. Whether we do that on the record or off the record, I'll defer to Your Honor.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'll let you, counsel, talk about that. And if we have an issue before we come back, so we'll give you, again, 1 hour from now, so 1:20, that we'll reconvene and just ask the council and everybody be ready to go at 1:20 p.m. according to that clock. Okay, we're in recess.
Your Honor, the instruction on recordings.
Before we go in front of the jury, I just have a 30-second or less matter.
Go ahead.
Mr. Shields is on the stand now. I don't have him under subpoena. I intend to have him served with a subpoena. I just spoke with him. He said that he's going to be available. He said he'd prefer I just do that through communication with the district attorney's office. Does everyone agree that I can just do that with the district attorney's office and don't have to formally serve him with a subpoena? And we can just communicate, and he'll be here when the defense needs him, so to speak.
All right, and Deputy Shields is generally available in the time frame that you're requesting?
Yes, we don't know, but I told him I would expect him maybe next Friday, and he said that he was working next Friday anyway, and so he said he was generally available then and the week after that as well.
All right. And then was there something else, Mr. Dufour, the state we should take up at this time?
Yes, Your Honor. It deals with the media coverage through Court TV. In this morning, when the video with Officer O'Neill was played, it included the cell phone number for Jason Mengel. That went out over the coverage, and Mr. Mengel has called us and indicating that he is getting numerous text messages from people relating to this case. That's something that clearly should have been excised and left off of the coverage, a personal cell phone number for a witness. And I believe, I think the media order requires that, but if it doesn't, it should. And I would, frankly, I think that's something that should have been known and should have been handled without even having to have that be a part of the order. But to the extent that if there is any further coverage that, or any further indications or identifications of personal information such as that, I would ask that the court order that not be broadcast by anyone, as it creates problems for individuals. So, and it certainly and understandably has upset Mr. Mengel, who's been getting numerous text messages because of this. So that's what I wanted to bring up.
All right. Well, I guess from this, at least at this point until the end of the day, I just would ask that, counsel be aware of this information, that, any information that may be either on a video there. I assume it was his giving his number out to the officers.
Yes, it was during the video of Officer O'Neill. He asks him what his number is, and he provides it, and it's clearly, you can hear it on the video and listing what his phone number is.
All right, well, again, at this point, and we can make some adjustments. However, I would just ask the council be mindful if there is anything that would be presented that would have any personal information such as that, to, bring that up so we can either, figure out some way to keep that personal information from being broadcast. Are you expecting any more videos today?
I don't believe so, Your Honor, no.
All right. Okay, and then, so, at this point, we'll work on a way to address that, but I need council to be gatekeepers, if you will, because I don't always know what is coming and what might be that type of information. So maybe if you give us some thought during the day and, we come up with what type of information are we going to be looking for? Phone numbers, dates of birth are probably in the same vein, but other personal identifying information that, could be used by somebody for inappropriate purposes, beyond, the inconvenience, embarrassment, or hassle associated with having your number out there. So, okay, thank you, and we'll try to address that. But I would appreciate, again, a list of the type of information that you want the court to include. And, okay, then are we ready to bring the jury back in and continue with Deputy Shields? Okay, Deputy Shields, you can come back to the witness stand. All right, Ms. Nodoff, you may continue, and Deputy Shields, you're still under oath.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Deputy, I believe before we broke for lunch, we were talking about how you spoke with the defendant prior to her sexual assault exam. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And so had the defendant changed clothes at this time?
Yes, she was currently in an ER gown or attire provided by the hospital.
And when she was in this gown, were you able to see her arms and legs more clearly?
Yes.
Did you observe any bruising or redness to the arms or legs?
I did not.
Did you notice any bruising to the neck
I did not see any, no.
or redness to the neck?
Not that I could see.
And was another officer with you at this point?
Officer Reeves arrived at one point, yes.
And is he an officer from the Eau Claire Police Department?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Is that Corey Reeves?
Yes.
And I guess when you're in the hospital, does your video or audio recording devices that are equipped to your squad, do they work?
No.
Can you explain why they don't?
Technically, no, I cannot with all the electronics, but basically if you get too far from your vehicle, whether you're just outside or whether you are in a room, in a residence, oftentimes it will not pick up. And we were a fair distance away from my squad at that time through concrete and steel walls, which it makes the recording device or the audio device pretty much unusable.
So this conversation that you and Officer Reeves had with the defendant was not recorded?
If Officer Reeves did not have a recording device, mine was not functioning, so my answer would be no.
Okay. And what, if anything, did the defendant say to you during this conversation?
Several things. We were still trying to ascertain where this took place. She had previously mentioned a park by a frog, I believe, which I'm not familiar with the Eau Claire area. Some of the staff advised that it might be Owen Park. And myself and Officer Reeves started to talk to her about anything that might have occurred at Owen Park in the city of Eau Claire.
So do you recall what was asked? What led the defendant to say something took place at Owen Park or a park by a frog?
I just continued to ask her where these events took place. Where did this happen? Where did you get assaulted?
And did you ask if there were any weapons?
Yes.
And how did she respond?
Initially, she responded no.
And did she change her response later?
She later advised that there was a knife that was involved. Yes.
Did she say what happened to the knife?
I don't recall asking her that. I recall her stating where she got the knife from, but not where it went.
Where did she state where the knife was from?
She advised that the knife had come from, I believe, her father or her stepfather. She referred to as both. And she advised that he had given her the knife in case she'd gotten into trouble or something like that.
So did you ask her what happened after there was a knife?
When I asked her about what happened, she didn't answer. She just said everything went black, something to that extent.
Maybe everything went dark?
Dark or black, that would be, yes.
Were you able to observe the boy on her left forearm better when she was in this hospital gown?
Yes.
Did you ask her how she got that carved into her arm?
She advised that the assailant had carved that into her arm.
And did she say who the assailant was?
Mr. Woodruff,
Or Alex Woodworth?
that's correct.
And did she provide any other detail as to how Alex put that boy into her arm?
How or
Yes.
what? She just said that he cut him, or did she cut it? He cut it into her arm.
And how would you describe the defendant's demeanor when she was disclosing these things to you?
At that time, when Officer Reeves and I went back into the room, she had changed from being very upset to almost very tired. But then as we began to speak to her about the location of the incident, the details, anything like that, she appeared to be getting upset again.
And what would happen, what did you observe when she became upset?
It's almost hard to explain. She would just begin to, I don't want to say howl, but cry out. At times she would cover her head with a blanket. Something similar to that.
And was she crying?
At points it appears that she was kind of crying, yes.
And did you observe tears at all?
I did not.
I have no further questions.
Okay, cross-examination. Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Shields, I just want to ask you questions to begin with about your initial arrival, okay?
Yes, sir.
You had a report from dispatch that said there was a female in distress, is that right?
Yes,
And then you got to Farmer Sippel's place, is that right?
that's correct, sir.
And when you got there, Wisconsin State Patrol,
Knutson?
Thank you. Mr. Knutson was already there, correct?
That is correct.
And Mr. Sippel was obviously already there.
Yes, sir.
And so when you entered the room, you were the fourth person in the room with Ezra, Trooper Knutson, and Farmer Sippel.
Yes,
And when you got there, you observed Ezra in a chair in distress.
yes, sir.
She had a blanket on,
Correct?
and the blanket, as you said, was up over her shoulders.
Yes, sir.
And then under that, she was clothed, right?
That's correct.
She had on a flannel blue plaid button-up shirt.
I believe so. The exact colors, Some people could describe it maybe as gray, maybe it was blue. But yeah, it was a flannel, what I would describe as a flannel shirt, I believe, yes.
Unbuttoned?
If it was completely unbuttoned, maybe one button was done, but if it was unbuttoned, that's possible, yes.
Okay. And then did you see what layers she was wearing underneath that, or were you not paying attention to the layers underneath that?
I believe it was just a T-shirt. It was just a T-shirt.
So what you remember seeing is that she had a T-shirt and a flannel on, correct?
Yes.
All right. You don't remember any other articles of clothing in between the T-shirt and the flannel?
Besides her pants, no, sir.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm just talking upper body.
Yes, sir.
And when you saw her, was she wearing her glasses or not wearing her glasses?
I don't believe she was wearing her glasses.
Okay, so the glasses were given to you by Ms. McCandless or by Trooper Knutson or by Mr. Sipple?
Trooper Knutson, I believe.
Okay, so at some point Trooper Knutson, before you arrived, had collected those glasses?
The exact time frame that he took them, you'd have to ask him, sir, but he had them on his person when he handed them over to me.
And so you didn't see him collect them, correct?
I don't believe I did, no.
Which would lead us to believe he did it before you got there, right?
I had to step outside several times to use my radio or to use my phone, so
Fair enough.
it's possible, yes, sir.
All right. You don't remember her wearing them, you just remember Trooper Knutson giving them to you, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you talked about the glasses, which were marked as Exhibit 244, is that right? We saw them up there, correct?
Yes, sir.
They weren't displayed to the jury close up to them, though, were they, correct?
No, they're right here.
Just right here, okay. And if we need to pull them out, that's fine, but I had a chance to look at them, so I want to ask you some questions about that, okay?
Yes, sir.
It appears as if on the lenses, there's light smudges of mud. Would that be fair?
I'm sure there probably is, yes, sir.
Okay. And then you had said that you'd seen what you thought was dried blood, is that right?
Correct.
And that would be on the upper portion of the frame on the left side, is that right?
I think there was probably more than one spot, but I believe that was a spot where it was found, yes.
Okay. And fair to say, as far as you know, those glasses were never sent anywhere to be tested to see if what you thought was dried blood was in fact dried blood. Agreed?
I'm not sure where it was. I handed it over once the investigation began, and where it went and where it's gone, I'm not aware.
Okay. But you did your part. You documented what you observed in a report and said you thought you saw dried blood on there, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And whether somebody else later on actually tested to see if your observations were correct or not, you don't know.
That's correct.
She appeared disheveled.
That would be a word that I would use, yes, sir.
Her hair was a mess.
Yes.
She had blood on her face.
Yes.
Her lip was cut.
I guess I'm not sure if it was cut or not.
She had blood on her lip.
There is blood around her mouth in a couple of spots, yes.
On her lip.
That would be accurate, yes, sir.
And then there was mud on her person, as you said.
Yes.
And then blood on certain other portions you observed, right?
Yes, sir.
Including on her right leg, which appeared to be actively bleeding. Not pouring out blood, but it was,
What I would say was oozing
okay,
slightly, yes.
but it looked fresh.
I believe so, yes.
All right. You asked her questions, right?
Yes, sir.
And she had a difficult time answering questions.
Yes, sir.
And when you were doing this at the scene, you had parked nearby, correct?
Correct.
And your squad car has a recording device, is that right?
That's correct.
Commonly thought of as a squad cam.
Yes, sir.
And it records both visually as well as audibly, correct?
When the audio works, yes.
And on that day, the audio was working, right?
It did not, believe when I first got there, my mic was not on. And then I want to say maybe a couple minutes after I arrived, I had observed that it wasn't on and then activated it.
Okay, but the times that you pressed on, it worked.
That's correct.
And there is a actual DVD recording of that, correct?
If it was burned, it's usually kept in a server, so it would be on a server and most likely on a physical DVD as well.
Have you had the opportunity in the past 19 months to go back and listen and/or watch that recording?
Yes,
Did you do that?
yes,
So there was a recording that you can hear bits and pieces of that conversation and the work that you were doing there at Mr. Sipple's house, right?
yes, sir.
And during that time when you first arrived, Mr. Sipple's also speaking, correct?
At times, yes, sir.
And one of the things he had said was it's the strangest thing he's ever seen in his 89 years. Is that right?
Something to that effect, yes, sir.
All right. And as you said, you were asking for her name, and she said, I can't figure it out, right?
Yes, sir.
And then at some point, the ambulance arrived, or a ambulance arrived, correct?
Yes, sir.
And medics from the ambulance arrived?
Correct.
And one of those medics is a man named Joe Wayne, is that right?
I believe so. I don't know all the medics by name.
Sure. The gentleman that you saw as you were walking into the courtroom about 20 minutes ago?
Yes, I believe he was there, yes.
Yes. And he was one of the people that treated, or at least had contact with Ms. McCandless there at Mr. Sipple's place, right?
Yes, sir.
And was he the one that asked her what her name was when she then said the word Monica?
You would have to ask him. I'm not sure if it was him or another member of his bus.
But what you know is a medic, or what we'll call somebody acting in the role of as a medic, asked him her name and she responded, Monica. Is that
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
And that was shortly after you had asked her it and she said, I can't figure it out.
I believe so, yes.
And then, kind of fast forwarding just on this name theme,
Yes, sir.
she then goes with the medics in the ambulance, correct?
Correct.
She's being taken to the hospital with the medics, is that right?
That's correct.
And then when you meet them at the hospital, you learn that during that hospital ride, she had told them she'd figured out her name and it's Ezra McCandless, is that right?
The exact details of how we came by her name, with either she said it or she told it to the ambulance crew, that I'm not very clear on. She was positively identified as Miss McCandless, either by her, she told him her name, I guess. Who it was, I don't know.
Okay, but it wasn't, as far as you know, it wasn't yourself, correct?
It was not myself,
And
no.
as far as you know, it wasn't law enforcement, agreed? Was not law enforcement, agreed?
I was the only one there, so it was not me, so,
So
yeah.
by deduction, that would leave us only with the medics?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I want to go back now before that and just ask some questions about your training and experience, okay?
Yes, sir.
Give us maybe the highlights. I don't want to get too personal, but just basically from high school on. After high school, did you go immediately into law enforcement? Did you go to college? Did you go into the service? Did you do something else?
Would you like my full educational background, I guess?
Sure, why not?
Okay. Outside of when I graduated high school, I got a technical diploma. I went to work for approximately a year and a half in Montana, came back, worked at several jobs, and then went back to school for law enforcement.
Okay.
And in which time I also joined the National Guard, was deployed to Iraq, and when I came back, I also completed my bachelor's degree in management.
Okay. And so again, just trying to get some chunks here. The time from high school until you went into law enforcement, 2 years, 4 years?
When I went into law enforcement, it was more than that. It was more than that. I think approximately 8 or 9.
And then roughly, what was that professions? We don't need to go into great detail, but was it?
I was just a laborer at several places. That was it. After I got married, I decided to go back to school. I began taking pre-engineering classes, and then I took calculus and decided not to do that anymore, so.
A lot of us have made that decision.
Yeah.
So then you switched gears and went into law enforcement.
Yes, sir.
And you, again, got a certificate to be a certified law enforcement officer.
That's correct.
And where did you begin working as a law enforcement officer first?
My first job was in the village of Elk Mound,
Okay.
and then I worked in Whitehall, and then I worked for the University of Wisconsin Stout.
All right. And then, I can't remember the exact, but 8 years or so after becoming a law enforcement officer, you then started working here in Dunn County for the sheriff's department?
5 years.
Okay. And in that 5 years before you were here, is that when you were in the National Guard?
I was in the National Guard, yes, and I was
And-
deployed during that time frame.
And when you were deployed to Iraq, was it,
Iraq, yes, sir.
what was your role there?
Objection to relevance.
I think it goes to training.
No,
and-
sustained. I don't know what,
Did you see any trauma when you were there?
Objection relevance.
I'm going to sustain. I don't know where you're going with this, witness on this. But
Do you have any specific training through National Guard or through law enforcement in how to deal with people who have encountered traumatic, life-threatening events?
Objection relevance and exceeds the scope of direct.
sustain.
As to the, well. So you may or may not have had training about that.
Objection relevance.
Sustained. Let's move on, Mr. Nelson.
Okay. So you made some observations that day, right?
Correct.
And when you made those observations, at first you were trying to figure out what was going on, right?
Yes.
And one of the first questions you asked Ms. McCandless was if she had ingested any drugs, correct?
I'm not sure if that was the first question that I asked, but it was a question that I did ask Ms. McCandless, yes.
And it was, again, I don't mean to say the first question, but it was early on in your contact with her. That was one of the first few questions you asked.
Yes, I believe so.
And one of the other questions, and she said no.
Hmm?
Is that correct?
Yes.
And you also then began asking questions about whether she'd been in a car accident or been thrown out of a car. Is that right?
Yes.
And I imagine you were trying to figure out if she'd had a head injury, right?
Amongst other things, yes, sir.
You were trying to assess why this young lady is in distress and doesn't remember things, correct?
That would be accurate, yes.
And in your toolbox, some of the things that in your experience, some of the things that you've seen before are drugs, is that right?
Yes,
Or car accidents, right?
correct.
Or head injuries from car accidents or other reasons, right?
Some, yes, sir.
And so it's within that framework that you're trying to sort out what's going on, right?
My framework isn't set to just those. I'm still just trying to determine basic information.
But you would agree that your framework is set by your training and experience, right?
Yes.
You're not going to
Yes.
consider things you don't know about, just like the rest of us. If you don't know about it, you're not going to consider it. Agreed?
Well, I consider everything until I have evidence otherwise.
Sure. But you couldn't consider an alternative that you had no knowledge of. Agreed?
Objection relevance.
I'm going to overrule that, I guess.
Mr. Nelson, you're going to have to reframe the question. I guess I'm not quite sure.
Sure.
If I don't know what I don't know, then I don't know.
I think that's what I'm getting at, yeah. So
I guess if I could explain when I get there what my mindset would be, would you like me to do that?
I'm not asking that. I'm asking about how you, like the rest of us, solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
And you solve problems based upon known solutions that you've seen or encountered in the past, right?
I guess partially, yes.
And if you don't know of a particular solution, you're not going to consider it because you have no knowledge of it. As you said, you don't know what you don't know. Agreed?
Yes.
Okay. And one of the things you didn't necessarily know was how victims of life-threatening trauma
Objection
react to that
relevance.
trauma.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Go ahead, you can ask the question.
Could you repeat the question, sir?
And one of the things you did not know was whether people suffering from life-threatening trauma, how they react to that life-threatening trauma. Agreed?
That I don't know anything about that?
No, I'm not saying you don't know anything, but at that point, you didn't know those Maybe the court reporter can read back the question that I originally asked.
And one of the things you didn't necessarily know was how victims of life-threatening trauma react to that trauma.
Can you answer that question?
I don't think that's a yes or no. I don't think I can provide a yes or no to that specifically, sir.
Do you have training on how victims of life-threatening trauma may or may not respond?
Yes.
And some of that is within the military,
There was some, yes.
and some of that's within law enforcement?
Yes.
Let me ask you the questions about the law enforcement. Where did you get that training? with
Section relevance?
Overruled. Noted, overruled.
It was more recently. It was after this incident. I did receive training. It was called critical, or basically became a member of a critical response team or critical response training, where you learn to speak to people and gather information when they're going through a traumatic event to try to get them to calm down and gather information, whether it was trauma or a mental illness or something like that.
And that's training that you received after March 22nd of 2018?
It
correct?
is, yes.
So as of March 22nd, 2018, you did not have that training, agreed?
That training, yes.
Okay. It sounds like you may have had some different training in your role within the military?
There was some, yes.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you some questions about your observations at the hospital, okay?
Good.
You followed her to you followed the ambulance that took her to the hospital, is that right?
That's correct.
And it took her to the hospital in Eau Claire, correct?
That is correct.
And then at some point, you found her in like an ER room, would that be fair to say? Is that what?
I don't know what found her was. I mean, I followed close behind the ambulance,
I
and
didn't mean to imply like you had to be searching. There was a poor choice in words. Tell me what happened when you got to the hospital.
basically the ambulance was there. I arrived there. I may have remained in my vehicle long enough to make a phone call, and then went into the ER and made contact with Miss McCandless.
Okay. And when you saw her there, she was, as you said, still very distraught, correct?
I would say yes.
And she was upset, correct?
Yes.
And that's when questions were, you had asked her about whether she wanted a sexual assault exam, and she said yes. Is that right?
Yes.
And then prior to her going and getting that exam, you asked her some questions that we heard you did with her. Is that right?
That's correct.
Let me just back up for 1 second. From the time that you arrived at Sippel's, Mr. Sippel's house, until the time that she went into the, for lack of a better term, custody of the medics, she was basically under constant supervision. Is that right? Somebody had eyeballs on her the whole time, right?
Yes.
And then you weren't there, but safe to assume that when she's in the ambulance, someone's watching her the whole time?
Yes.
And then when she gets from the ambulance to the hospital, again, she's under constant supervision, correct?
Yes.
And then when she's at the hospital, she's again under constant supervision, as far as you know, right?
As far as I know, yes, sir.
And when she wasn't, the only times that you weren't observing her was when she went to go change out of her clothes. Is that right?
Yes.
And then after you spoke with her when she went to go get the SANE exam, correct?
Yes.
But you can agree that from the time basically law enforcement arrived at Mr. Sippel's until she was undergoing the SANE exam, she was under constant supervision by either law enforcement, medics from the ambulance, or hospital personnel. Agreed?
I don't know if I call it supervision, care. Yes, I was around. Other people were around as well, yes.
For lack of a better way of explaining it.
You want to use supervision? That's fine.
Somebody had eyes on her.
Correct.
She wasn't left alone.
Yes.
Okay. So when she goes into a room, changes out of her clothes, she comes back, she's in a hospital gown.
Yeah, she changed in the room. There's a curtain across the doorway. There was a nurse or several nurses that were in there with her, I believe.
All right. And then They pulled back the curtain, you got the clothes, or somebody within law enforcement got the clothes, is that right?
The nurses had the clothes at that time.
But at some point, it went to you or another law enforcement officer, right?
I did not actually take physical custody of them. They were placed in bags that, as I requested that they do, and they were placed inside a closet storage area within her room, and they were locked by the hospital staff.
And you told them to put them in separate bags, right? Each article of clothing.
Yes.
Did you see that there was 6 bags?
I did not count the bags.
Okay. Does that sound about right?
It could be. Again, I didn't count them.
Okay. When you had this conversation with her at the hospital when she's in the gown, you were accompanied by Eau Claire Police Department Officer Corey Reeves, is that right?
That's correct.
Have you had as far as you know, does Mr. Reeves have a squad cam, dash cam?
Those are questions for him, sir. I don't know.
Nobody's told you whether or not he had recorded the conversation that the 3 of you had?
If it was mentioned or if I was told, I guess I don't recall that, sir.
Nobody's played that recording for you?
No.
You've not had a chance to listen to what Officer Reeves recorded regarding that conversation at all?
If there's a recording, I have not heard it, no.
Okay. You're just going based upon your memory from a year and 7 months ago?
Yes, sir.
Were you in the, during that conversation, Officer Reeves was asking her questions?
Yes.
And this was part of the conversation that you'd already told us about, that same one, right? Did you, I'm going to start over, that was a poor question. Do you know if Mr. Reeves ever met with Ezra McCandless without you?
I would assume, after, because I believe he had contact with her after the exam.
Okay.
I don't recall him speaking to her without me there. I don't recall that.
All right, so if it did occur, it would have been after the exam?
I believe so.
Because once she went in for the exam, you went and did other duties?
When the exam took place, myself and Officer Reeves believed that the incident took place inside Eau Claire, which is outside of my jurisdiction. And based on the information that we had, we believed that it happened in Eau Claire. And since he was an Eau Claire officer, he advised that he would be taking over from here.
Sure. And so at that point, your involvement in the case ended? Would that be fair to say?
In that day, yes.
Okay. Your contact with Ms. McCandless ended?
Yes.
Were you in the room when Officer Reeves was asking Ezra about Alex?
I may have been. I don't.
Do you recall Officer Reeves asking Ezra why Alex was calling her boy?
The questions came up.
Were you in the room?
I might have been.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you recall Officer Reeves asking Ezra, does he treat you poorly when you guys are together? And Ezra's answer to that question?
Objection, hearsay.
I didn't ask for the answer. I'm asking if he was there during it.
Okay, go that far, then we get to the next question. But go ahead, you can answer that question.
My honest answer, sir, is I don't recall.
Okay.
I don't recall
And
it.
that's all we want from you is honesty, so I appreciate that. And nobody's ever played for you the recording of what Officer Reeves said?
I don't believe I've ever had a recording of that.
Okay. Do you recall whether you were in the room when Officer Reeves followed up and asked questions about whether she was talking about sexual things?
Those are questions for Mr. Reeves. I don't remember if I was in the room or not.
Okay.
I don't like to necessarily record things that I didn't ask. So if he asked those things, we asked questions, and I believe we both asked questions about sexual activity or if there was an attempt to assault her sexually. But we both asked those questions, I guess.
So you were in the room when he was having these conversations?
Those specific questions that you're asking me, you would have to speak to Officer Reeves about. I remember asking certain questions about an attempt or any kind of sexual contact that they may have had. To be blatantly honest, I don't remember specifically who asked what. I just tried to remember the overall conversation when it came to those things.
So what it sounds like is your memory is better about what you asked and how Ezra answered you, correct?
I hope so. Yes.
But you don't have a clear memory about what Officer Reeves asked and what Ezra McCandless answered in response to his questions. Is that what you're telling us?
That would be accurate, I think, yes.
But you were there when it happened, you just don't remember the details enough to say it under oath in court, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just topic-wise, I'm just asking you about the topic. Do you recall Officer Reeves asking her questions about her history with Alex, anything that had happened in the past with Alex other than on March 22nd?
I believe there was conversation about that, yes.
And do you recall what Ezra's responses were? You can't say what they are, but just right now, do you recall what her responses were?
I don't exactly recall what they were.
Okay. And whether those are captured on a recording by Officer Reeves is beyond your knowledge, is that right?
As far as I know, yes, sir.
And it was during this conversation that she appeared at first very tired, is that right?
Yes.
And then as questions were asked about the experience that she just went through, she got more upset.
Yes.
That's all. Thank you.
Okay, any redirect? Ms. Nordhoff?
Yes. You were asked about your observations of the defendant when she was at Mr. Sippel's house. Can you explain what you meant about blood on her face?
It was more of a smear than if it was like coming from a cut, I guess. If somebody went like this or went like this, I don't recall any blood leaking or coming from any area. I just remember seeing something that appeared to be blood. Like if somebody would have had a bloody nose and gone like this, or had blood. If someone would have had a bloody nose and run it across their face, or had blood on their hands, or possibly on their lip, if they would have gone like this.
And you were asked about can you explain your mindset when you arrived at Mr. Sippel's house?
My mindset is until I have other proof that I have a victim. It's to get her care, to get her treatment, to get her, and to figure out what exactly is going on. If I have a suspect, if it was, like Mr. Nelson asked, if it was an accident or something like that, my mindset is wide open. I don't have any, this is what this is. I'm just trying to gather any information that steers me in a particular direction.
And you said that she appeared disheveled. Is that right?
Yes.
And do you know how she became disheveled?
No.
And do you know how she had blood on her clothes or on her face?
That's what we were trying to figure out.
And was there a time when you were interacting with her where the defendant stopped answering your questions?
To answer that honestly is sort of. She didn't say, I'm not answering any questions or I'm not going to. She would just get to the point where she appeared to get upset where she wasn't answering, if that makes sense.
And so if you didn't see crying or tears, what did you observe?
I observed, it appeared that she was, how would I classify as she was trying to be upset at some point.
And when you left the Mayo Hospital, did you believe that if there was an incident, it had occurred at Owen Park or somewhere in Eau Claire?
Myself and Officer Reeves believe that that's where it took place.
And that was based on the statements the defendant provided, both you and Officer Reeves?
Yes.
No further questions.
Any recross?
Briefly, this was your first time meeting Ms. McCandless?
It was.
You'd never, prior to that, seen her in a situation where she was crying, agreed?
Yeah, this is the first time I believe I've met her, yes.
So you don't know what her typical response is physically when she's upset or crying, correct?
That's an accurate statement, yes.
That's all, thank you.
Okay, Deputy Shields, you may step down. And my understanding is that, hey, you're free to go, but